Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. This week we will be covering Batman Gotham by Gaslight, as well as its sequel, Master of the Future. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. This is the Cultured Pull List, part of the Cultured Universe podcast network. I am your host, Mike. If you are new to this show, this is your first time watching, welcome. Basically, what we do on this podcast is, well, I say we, but I am alone this week. No co host. But what we do on this podcast is we basically just choose a story of the week. A story arc, one shot, something significant, some significant story or story arc. And we talk about it, review it, and talk about any adaptations, animated, live action, anything like that, kind of compare them. So that's basically what we're going to do today. Today we're going to be talking about Gotham by Gaslight and its sequel, Master of the Future, which honestly I did not realize that it had a sequel until I looked into reading this. But this is a story I've been meaning to read for a long time. I've heard all about it. I saw the animated movie. I never actually ended up watching it, and reading it until for this show. And the reason I chose to do it this week is because last week a new sequel, the Kryptonian Age, Gotham by Gaslight, the Kryptonian Age, the first issue dropped. So I figured I might as well cover the original since I've been meaning to anyway, and I'm actually really looking forward to this sequel. Sounds really cool. But what's really interesting about Gotham by Gaslight, one reason why it's so notable is it's regarded as the first Elseworlds story. This came out before the DC Elseworlds label came out. And if you're not aware what Elseworlds is, it's basically just stories that exist outside of the main continuity that kind of explore different aspects of the characters and put them in unfamiliar situations that wouldn't really work, canon wise. And like with this takes place in the Victorian era, the late 1800s. So obviously that wouldn't really make sense for Bruce Wayne to be alive then. So that this is just kind of like an alternate universe type stuff. It's basically an excuse for them to explore alternate like worlds and realities and stuff like that. So it's pretty interesting. But so Gotham by Gaslight was kind of the first Elseworlds, even though it came out before the Elseworlds label. And then subsequent stories after followed in its footsteps, under the Elseworlds label, exploring new realities and stuff. But yeah, so pretty interesting story. We'll get into that in a second. I did want to cover a little bit of news before we get into that and before we get into the animated movie, which is actually pretty good. I don't know if you haven't watched it, you definitely check it out. You don't need to read the comic or anything to check out the movie. I will. I don't normally do this, but I feel like I need to. There's major spoilers in for this comic and this movie. So just so you're aware, if you haven't read it and you care, just so you're aware. Yeah, but so a couple little bits of news. It's really just about Marvel's new Ultimate Universe, which, by the way, if you have not checked out the new Ultimate Universe, like the Ultimates, Ultimate Invasion, Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate Black Panther, I definitely would suggest checking it out because it's some of the best stuff coming out of Marvel Comics right now. But something that's really interesting in issue 9 of Ultimate Spider Man, which is going to come out in this September, the new Sinister Six is going to be revealed, or at least I think the first member is going to fight Spider Man. In anticipation of this, Marvel released the Ultimate Sinister Six lineup, and it's going to be Kingpin, Craven the Hunter, Mr. Negative, Mysterio, Mole Man, which is surprising. He's not generally a Spider Man villain, and Black Cat, but it's a gender bent Black Cat. It's a male Black Cat. Most likely it's going to be Warren Hardy, Felicia Hardy's father, but they haven't confirmed or denied that, seems like. But yeah, it's a really interesting lineup. I honestly like this a lot. I think for me, when you're doing like an alternate universe type thing, I feel like it's, like a great opportunity to explore different ways of doing things and just different iterations of the characters, and I feel like if you're just gonna do the same thing as the main universe, just like with very minor tweaks, it's kind of boring. So I like that they've really changed up the Sinister Six lineup. There are still some people there like Craven and Mysterio, and Mr. Negative is more. I think he's more like in the Spider-Man games, Sinister Six, but still, he's still and Kingpin. They're all Spider-Man villains. But then the Gingerbread Black Cat's interesting, and Mole Man is interesting. He's normally a Fantastic Four villain, so I'm curious to see what they do with that character. Another thing that coming in, some more news out of the Ultimates universe is the Ultimates #4, which is also coming out in September. But this is supposed to give more of a backstory, flesh out the origin and backstory of Ultimate Doom, which, if you're not aware, is actually this universe's version of Reed Richards. And he was basically like made Doom by the maker, the original Ultimate Reed Richards. So yeah, it's very interesting. I'm very curious to see how they flesh out that character. It's kind of been a mystery this whole time, kind of like what his actual origins are, and why. I mean, why the maker made him wear the Doom mask besides to mock him, I guess. But it seems like they're gonna get a little more in depth with his character, which is cool. Yeah, let's get into the book. Let's get into the summary, and then like my review and all that fun stuff. So, Gotham by Gaslight and Master of the Future were both written by Brian Augustyn, with art by Mike Mignola and Eduardo Barreto. The inker was P. Craig Russell, with colors by David Harnung and Steve Oliff, and letters by John Workman and Willie Schubert. And these were both single issue one shots. They're like, 50 pages each or so. And Gotham by Gaslight was released in February 1989, and Master of the Future was released 3 years later on February 1992. The story begins with Bruce Wayne remembering the brutal murders of his parents. When he was a child, Bruce's family carriage was held up by an armed man when they were on their way home one evening. Bruce's parents were shot, but Bruce was saved by a swarm of bats that chased the killer away. When Bruce is older, he spends years traveling Europe learning from experts in hand-to-hand combat, criminology, and psychology. In 1889, Bruce has been finishing studying with neurologist Sigmund Freud. With his time shadowing Freud coming to a close, Bruce decides to travel back to Gotham. On the boat back home, Bruce runs into his father's old friend Jacob Packer, who had also been traveling across Europe. Arriving back home, Bruce begins making plans to don his vigilante persona, Batman. Bruce starts by visiting his old friend Inspector Gordon, who tells Bruce about the crime plaguing Gotham. Bruce uses this information to begin his war on crime, and soon begins catching the attention of the public. But soon the media and Police Commissioner Tolliver pin a recent string of murders on Batman. But it soon becomes apparent that these murders are being committed by Jack the Ripper, who has migrated from London to Gotham. Bruce begins hunting down the Ripper, and is almost able to catch him in the act of slaughtering another woman, but Jack is just barely able to escape. That same night, Tolliver tells Gordon that he has figured out that Jack the Ripper is none other than Bruce Wayne. The next day, the police, with Bruce Wayne's permission, search his house. To Bruce's surprise, Gordon finds Jack's murder weapon, and Bruce is arrested. Jacob Packer represents Bruce as his lawyer, but Bruce is found guilty and sentenced to be hanged. Inspector Gordon, believing that Bruce was framed, brings Bruce all the files and evidence he has on Jack the Ripper. While he is imprisoned waiting for his execution, Bruce tries to figure out who Jack the Ripper actually is. After several days, and growing more and more desperate, Bruce finally discovers a clue. The knife Jack used to murder all those women, and planted in Bruce's home, bore the crest of his father's regiment in the Civil War. Bruce realized that whoever Jack is, he was a part of Thomas Wayne's regiment in the Union Army. Later that night, Alfred visits Bruce and switches places with him so Bruce can leave and stop Jack from killing again. Knowing Bruce is about to be executed the next day, Jack attempts to murder another young woman, but he is stopped by Batman. Batman chases Jack through into the outskirts of Gotham, and finally catches up to him, revealing him to be none other than Jacob Packer. Packer explains that he was in love with his best friend's wife, Martha Wayne, and he never got over being rejected by her. He was the one that arranged for Bruce's parents to be murdered. and began killing women because they reminded him of Martha. Bruce reveals his identity to Packer, who begs for mercy. The two are interrupted by Gordon and the Gotham police, and Gordon shoots and kills Jacob as he attempts to murder Bruce. Gordon lets Batman go, believing that Gotham needs Batman to protect it. Nearly a year later, Bruce has retired the mantle of Batman, as he believes his mission has been fulfilled in finding his parents' killer. Bruce is engaged to a woman named Julie, who is a bit obsessed with Batman and wonders where he has gone. Gordon is also missing Batman, believing that Gotham needs him now more than ever. Alfred also believes that Bruce should continue his crusade as Batman, but his attempts to convince Bruce bear no fruit. In the upper echelons of power in Gotham, Mayor Tolliver, formerly the Commissioner, prepares to launch his festival celebrating America's future and scientific innovation. During a city council meeting, Tolliver faces pushback from several council members that believe this fair is taking money away from other things the city needs. One of these members is Mr. Claypool, who has tried in vain for months to get funding for his slum renewal program. The meeting is interrupted by a man dressed in a bombastic French uniform, appearing in the 9th floor window and introduces himself as Alexander Leroy, and also calls himself the Master of the Future. He warns of the pollution that the forthcoming industrial technology of the future will cause, and threatens to burn the city with fire from the sun if Tolliver's fair isn't called off. He then leaps from the window and disappears. At dinner that night, Bruce and Julie discuss the news of Leroy's actions, and Julie admits that she believes Batman is the city's best hope of stopping Leroy and villains like him. That same evening, Leroy meets with his secret benefactor. Knowing that Tolliver and the rest of Gotham's leaders won't bend to his demands, Leroy prepares to launch his attack on Gotham, believing the only way for the people to learn is through destruction. The next morning, Bruce arrives late to the fair planning committee, where they are attacked by an unmanned, clown-shaped cart, the clown facade falling away to reveal a hidden machine gun. Bruce is able to save Mayor Tolliver and destroy the gun by throwing a lead pipe at it. Inside the cart's fallen clown head, the committee finds a threat from the Master, which only strengthens Tolliver's resolve to hold the fair. Bruce returns home and dons his old Batsuit, believing it is time for Batman's return to stop Leroy. On the day of the fair's opening, Leroy invades Tolliver's house and kidnaps him, bringing him onto his airship. Leroy explains to Tolliver how he will use a solar-powered laser weapon to destroy Gotham, then throws Tolliver out of the airship to his death. Seeing that Gotham and its people are in mortal danger, Bruce changes into his Batsuit and grabs a pair of glider wings on display at the fair. In the destructive fallout of Leroy's attack, many people are scrambling from the flames that are engulfing the city. Seeing a child in danger, Julie attempts to rescue her, but ends up being saved by Batman herself. Batman then uses his glider wings to reach Leroy's airship, and a high-stakes battle ensues. During the fight, the airship's pressure controls are damaged, sending the ship on a swift collision course towards the ground. Batman realizes the ship is going down, and he tries to warn Leroy, but Leroy is too focused on killing Batman to heed his warnings. Batman manages to escape with his life, but Leroy goes down with his ship in a fiery explosion. In the aftermath of Leroy's attack, the fires are contained to the original attack sites, but still over 100 people are confirmed dead. Franklin Claypool, the council member who was trying to get funding for his slum renewal program, is confronted by Batman in his offices. Claypool confesses that he was Leroy's secret partner, revealing that once he knew the council would not fund his program, he would let Leroy destroy the slums and he could use the insurance money to fund his program. As Claypool is arrested, he shows remorse for his actions, as he did not plan on anyone actually getting hurt. Later, as Julie and Bruce share a romantic walk in the woods, Julie reveals to Bruce that she knows he is Batman, and it does not change how she feels about him. In fact, she still admires him and believes that Gotham still needs Batman to protect it. In the end, Batman continues to watch over Gotham and its people. Alright, so Gotham by Gaslight. I think what's really noticeable, what's really notable, I mean, about this book is just kind of the art and the vibe of it. It's kind of been labeled as steampunk, even though I don't think the first story, Gotham by Gaslight, is very steampunk. There isn't really any, steam powered crazy gadgets or anything. It mostly just feels like a period piece, like Victorian era story. But I really like I really like the concept of Jack the Ripper coming to Gotham and being like the first real murder case that that Batman has to take on. I really like that concept. I really like the feel, like the Victorian era feel of Gotham. That's really cool, and I feel like Batman really fits well in this era. Kind of because it's kind of the same era as Sherlock Holmes as well. So the whole detective vibe really works in this era. I do feel like this story is one of those instances where the concept is better than the execution. I'm not saying it's like it's definitely not bad. I just feel like and I feel like this is largely because they made this a one shot, and I don't think this is the writers' fault or anybody. I think it's probably DC who wanted this to be a one shot instead of like a mini series. But I think this would have worked better as a mini series. It felt a little bit like rushed and kind of I felt like the pacing was kind of like all a little all over the place, and I feel like they could have used more other Batman characters because the only characters from the comics, the main Batman comics that appear in this are Bruce Wayne, Alfred, and Jim Gordon and Harvey Dent barely. But then in the sequel Master of the Future, I don't think they add any other characters from the comic. There's no like alternate universe version of anybody like Catwoman, Dick, any villains really. And I think that's really where this story kind of misses the mark. I think both of them. I think the first one gets away with it a bit because it's like the first one and Jack the Ripper's the main villain. That works. I feel like the second one, kind of having that Leroy character as the main villain, was kind of a misstep. I feel like they could have made that character like a alternate universe version of really any Batman character. It would have been cool to see like an alternate universe Scarecrow or Riddler or something like that, some like Victorian era version of a classic Batman character. And I feel like they kind of missed an opportunity for that. But that's just my personal opinion, and maybe we'll get. It does seem like this new Kryptonian Age sequel is going to bring in a lot more characters from the Batman mythos, as well as some other DC, some other like Victorian era DC characters. So that is cool. That's one reason I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah, I think this book, the art I mentioned earlier, but the art is very cool, especially in the first one. The second book, I thought the art was okay. I don't think it was anything super special, but I feel like the original art by Mike Mignola, he did a really good job making the art feel very kind of dated in a good way, to match the late 1800s era. I feel like it really worked to capture the mood of the book, and yeah, I just really enjoyed kind of the like old style like colors and everything. I think that worked really well. The second book, the Master of the Future book, just kind of felt like basic art for the time, like the 90s. Which I feel like a lot of 90s books kind of suffered from that, not just, Batman, not just this, but I think a lot of 90s artwork was just kind of bland in a lot of ways. Um, but yeah, so I think overall, I think these two books were pretty good. I definitely prefer Gotham by Gaslight. The sequel, I liked moments of it. I kind of liked the whole thing where Batman was struggling, was kind of looking to retire, but he kind of couldn't. He realized the city needed him, and I thought all that was interesting. I liked that Jim Gordon was on his side, but I felt like the second book was kind of lacking a lot. I already mentioned, like, I felt the villain was just kind of kind of came out of left field. I felt like they could have done made the villain a little more interesting. I did like the whole idea of the airship. That was pretty cool. But again, I feel like they could have made it, an alternate universe version of a classic Batman villain, and that would have been cool. So I felt like, yeah, Master of the Future left me a little cold. Didn't really do much for me. Gotham by Gaslight, though, I feel like just the vibe and idea of it works really well. I just feel like it could have offered more if it was a longer story, like a mini series instead of just a one shot. But it was cool to go back and read this classic because I've heard about Gotham by Gaslight for a long time, and obviously they made the movie about it in 2018. Which, speaking of the movie, I guess let's get into the animated series adaptation. This is one of the few times where I feel like the animated adaptation is significantly better than the original work, and maybe this is blasphemy to say. I don't know. I haven't really heard that many people talk about Gotham by Gaslight, but it is considered a classic. But what I really like about this movie is that it takes elements from both stories to kind of make the whole Gotham by Gaslight world. That's really cool. And I really like that it brings in characters from the overarching Batman mythos and everything. Like Selena Kyle's in it. I think she was a good addition. I think having Dick and Jason and Tim in it was interesting. All that kind of stuff. They also made a little more steampunk, which I don't. I'm kind of on the fence, but I feel like it makes some sense for Batman. Like having a steam, like a steam powered, a steam powered grappling gun and like a steam powered motorcycle. That was all kind of cool. Um, and I think just overall, it felt like there was a lot more action. I think that was a big thing too that was missing from the original comic. There wasn't really much action, even when Batman confronted Jack the Ripper. Jack just kind of ran, and as soon as Batman caught up to him, he just won. There was no real fight there. I feel like this movie did a really good job, having a good blend of action and intrigue, and got the whole murder mystery thriller vibe thing going on. I really liked that. I didn't bring this up earlier. I don't know. I think I like the animated like version of the killer better. In the story, obviously, it's Jacob Packer, who was just this like family friend they just sort of introduce at the beginning, and it was a pretty good twist, but at the same time, if you're familiar with the Batman comics, and then they just sort of introduce this character that, as far as I know, isn't in the other comics. It kind of feels like, oh, well, of course, it's kind of like, in any sort of murder mystery show when they have like a guest star, you're like, oh, well, he's gonna be the killer. It just kind of felt like that, like, oh, here's a new character, and surprise, he's Jack the Ripper. I feel like making Jim Gordon Jack the Ripper, probably some people wouldn't like that, but it's another universe, so I feel like that was actually a huge surprise. And I feel like it all made sense in context of the story. Like his skill, his ability to, he was a I think it was Civil War. He was an army medic, or our army barber surgeon. So I think just that whole element, I think, made sense. They made it make sense in the context of the story. And it's an alternate universe version, so it's not like they're damaging Jim Gordon's character, because it's not the classic Jim Gordon. So I did like all that. I thought that was interesting. They definitely got kind of political with, which I kind of feel like if you're kind of gonna tackle, like Jack the Ripper nowadays, considering he only went after, female prostitutes, you kind of have to, address the, elephant in the room, the, misogynist idea of it. But I feel like sometimes it worked in this movie, and sometimes it felt kind of forced and heavy-handed. So, but I feel like Jim Gordon's motivations, like they made him like a psycho, which is kind of funny. And in the original comic, Jacob Packer was basically like he was just kind of an incel when you think about it. Like, he got rejected by Martha, and now he kills a bunch of women because that he couldn't handle the rejection. So I think that was kind of not really funny, but I thought that was interesting what they did. And like in both instances, Jack the Ripper is like insane, which I kind of feel like you have to be. But I will say there is kind of the thing with Jack the Ripper is he kind of became a mythical boogeyman type creature. So tackling him, in the comic and in the movie is interesting, because it kind of takes away a bit from the Jack the Ripper character, or idea of him when you give him an identity. So I feel like it just worked better in the movie, because in the comic he just sort of seemed like a sniveling, like unimpressive character, which was probably the point. I just kind of prefer that he was just more of a he felt a lot more like a dangerous threat and like a psycho in the animated movie. So I don't know. That's just my opinion on that. I mean, I might be kind of biased too because I saw the movie well before I read this book, so I was kind of expecting. I think about halfway through the book, I realized there's no way Jim could be the Ripper and it to make any sense. So by the end, I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, it kind of makes sense that it was Jacob Packer. That didn't surprise me. Honestly, I was like, oh, like I said earlier, I was like, oh, he's the only character in here that doesn't really fit. So, oh yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention that I didn't really like about the movie was that they just kind of made Gotham like they kind of made it indistinguishable from London. Like they had a lot of well, like in the comic, Jack the Ripper, is the classic Jack the Ripper from London. He kills a bunch of people in London. Then he disappears, but he ends up going back to Gotham where he's actually from. Starts crime. He, starts a murder wave there. But then in the movie, they never really make the distinction that Jack the Ripper is from London. They made it seem like Jack the Ripper was just always in Gotham, and I thought that was kind of weird. I feel like they could have easily just been like, yeah, he's he started in London and then he came here to Gotham. But I don't know. I don't know why they changed that really, but yeah. And speaking of Selena in this, she's actually showing up in the new Kryptonian Age comic. So I'm curious to see if they're actually gonna take any like inspiration from the movie, or they're just gonna go like a completely different route with it. But yeah, I think overall I do enjoy the animated movie better, which I feel like is kind of rare with animated movies, besides like, a select few. But I think overall the comic story is usually better than the animated story. I think a lot of times they make too many changes in the animated movie when I feel like it could have just worked to do an almost one-to-one adaptation. Like I think a big a big example of that is Hush, where they really changed Hush and made him the Riddler instead of his own character and Tommy Elliott. They really changed that, and that I know that kind of ruined the movie for a lot of fans. It kind of did for me as well. Um, as somebody who's like a fan of the Hush character, making him just an alter ego for Riddler kind of sucked for me. But yeah, I think this is an instance where the animated movie actually most of the changes it made were actually for the better. I think it helps too that both the comics were so short that it would really be hard to make a whole movie without adding stuff. So I think that like made sense. They definitely made changes, but a lot of them were they kind of had to add stuff. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. I'm done rambling about the movie. It was, yeah, the comics very interesting. If you haven't read them, it's at least worth reading, especially the first one. And I think if you're planning on reading the new one, the Kryptonian Age, then it's definitely probably good to read the other two beforehand, just so you know what you're getting into. But yeah, before I wrap things up, this always goes a little shorter when it's just me sitting here, because I don't have anybody else to talk to and bounce ideas off of. But before I wrap things up, I want to do our cultured picks, which is really my cultured picks. But yeah, so first off, Black Panther Blood Hunt #1. I've been really looking forward to this book ever since it was announced. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward from the cover. It's Black Panther as a vampire, which is very interesting. What I didn't expect is that he still kind of keeps his sense of self. I expected him to just kind of be a villain after this, but instead he ends up going back to Wakanda and trying to protect his people from this vampire like wave of vampires that isn't like infecting the whole world. And he tries to protect his country, but he ends up, he's also struggling with the bloodlust he now has as a vampire. And there's this really interesting scene where Shuri like cuts her hand and like lets T'Challa have some of her blood so he can like, you know, satiate that hunger and not, end up accidentally killing somebody. But I thought was really interesting. Just seeing T'Challa struggle from that was really interesting. and I think he tried to cure himself with the heart-shaped herb, but then like Bass gets mad at him for like defiling, the ancestral plane or whatever. It's like it's very interesting just because it's not what I expected. I kind of expected him to just be a vampire and go on a rampage or something, but instead, he's struggling with this vampire side of him and trying to find a cure, but also trying to like defend his people. And yeah, it was just very cool. I really look forward to the other issues. There's gonna be two more because it's a 3-issue mini series. But yeah, I think out of all, I mean, I haven't really read any of the other like spin-offs of Blood Hunt, but this is definitely the one I would check out if you're interested. Besides, the main Blood Hunt. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is Amazing Spider-Man Blood Hunt #2. Um, I think it's good. I wouldn't say I love it. I do find it interesting that this does really connect to the Beyond Amazing Spider-Man run that came out a few years ago. So if you read that and enjoyed that, you'll definitely like this run. But what I find interesting about this is that Morbius kind of takes a huge role in this, and something the main reason I wanted to mention this book is that they actually put the "It's Morbin Time" meme in a comic, which is, yeah. I mean, I feel like comics have been doing this a lot, where they kind of get kind of meta and bring in like memes and stuff to the comics, and I feel like sometimes it's really funny and sometimes it's a little like low hanging fruit. I feel like this is kind of a mix of that because when I read it, I was like, I did not expect it, but it is, kind of cringy when you think about it too hard. But what I thought was funny is when he says that Morbius like threatened to kill him, so that was funny. Yeah, so I just feel like everything surrounding Morbius since the Morbius movie has unfortunately been kind of like shaky, I guess, which is unfortunate because he's actually a really cool character. Um, yeah, but that is the show for this week. Like I said, a little bit shorter, but thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out our episode coming up this Friday, dropping on our normal time on Friday. I'm going to be having Jerry from Comics Cuts on once again, and we're going to be talking about Neil Gaiman's Eternal run and the Eternals movie. So that should be interesting. Definitely stick around and check that out when it comes out. But thank you so much for watching. If you would like to help support us so we can keep bringing you more great content, you can check us out on patreon.com/theculturednerd and look for the Cultured Pull List specific tier. Thank you to all of our current Patreon supporters: Wesley H., Mitch S., Connor Y., Anna M., Oscar B., Craig L., and Salib K. I have been your host, Michael Malillo. All of our visual assets, including our logo, were designed by Jose Navarro. Thank you again for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and share. We are actually now, the audio versions of these podcasts are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much every podcast platform that you use. So check that out if you're more into listening to audio for podcasts. Check that out. If you'd like to check out the Cultured Pull List on social media, you can check us out on just the Cultured Pull List on Instagram, or you want to check out the Cultured Nerd on socials, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left. If you'd like to check out Casual Experts, which is my other brand that I have with Luke, where we just talk about all things nerdy and pop culture on our podcast and our socials, you can scan the QR code on the bottom right to check that out. Until next time.